want to thank, first of all, John for asking me to speak here today. If you've heard the expression, fighting outside your weight class, today I'm definitely presenting a few levels above my pay grade, so I appreciate the opportunity to do so to such a distinguished and accomplished group as we have here today. I want to talk, this is not my PowerPoint. There we go, gotcha. I want to talk briefly about the approval and funding process for core projects. Senator Boxer and Eric Saperstein set the stage maybe too well for me. They covered a few of my topics, but I want to introduce you to how the core process works within the overall federal budget process. I know we have many of our project partners here in the room today. I've heard firsthand from many of you that you were frustrated, confused by the process, and I think it's understandable. The core process has been changing significantly over the last few years. Important changes, I think some really good changes have been happening, but I want to update you on the status of the process, and hopefully that will help you and your agencies better get from idea to implementation for your projects. So I want to answer maybe three major questions, and if I can do that, I'll consider it a success. First, what are the major steps in the approval and funding of core projects? How has the feasibility study process changed? Eric talked about 3x3x3, and I'll tell you a little more about that. And then finally, what are the primary metrics and how are projects prioritized by the administration? As Senator Boxer said, there are no more earmarks. It's a big change in how core projects are funded. So whereas before the appropriations were president's budget plus earmarks, these days the president's budget represents the ceiling of the appropriations amount as opposed to the floor historically. So it's more important than ever to be in the president's budget. So this is if you can see the screens hopefully, this is a depiction of the federal budget process. It begins in January with the Office of Management and Budget releasing their guidance to the agencies. Currently, right now, we're in the process of developing the program requirements for the FY15 budget. So it's a 2-year process. We're providing metrics, data, information, justification to our headquarters that will then work with the Office of Management and Budget, that is the administration, to develop the president's budget. Once the president has fully developed the budget, come February of next year, it will enter the legislative phase. What I'm talking about today is mostly that executive phase. As I said, it's more important than ever to be in the president's budget. Once the legislative phase is concluded, hopefully the president will sign an Energy and Water Development Appropriations Act next year, end of next year. At that point, funds are released to the districts to execute your projects, our projects. So these are 4 of the major steps to get from idea to implementation. You first need study, authorization, and appropriation. I'm not going to talk much about that today. If you would like information about that, our district website, which I will show you later, has some great resources to understand how to get your study authorized. After you have a study authorized and you have funds to enact that study, to begin it, you need to complete your feasibility report and get it approved. An approved feasibility report will lead to a chief's report, which is basically an executive summary of the feasibility report that is signed by the chief of engineers. That report goes to the administration for clearance and then on to Congress for hopefully authorization in a Water Resources Development Act that we heard about today. Once you have your feasibility report approved and on its way to Congress, you need to get it authorized. That is your permission slip for construction. So two important distinctions. Authorization is the permission, and then the appropriations, as many of you know, the actual funding to implement. So let me talk first about the feasibility study process. I have a little tracker bar. If you're looking at the screen on the right-hand side, you can sort of follow along with where we are in the process. Eric talked about the 3x3x3 rule. The Corps has heard the complaints. We feel it. Our studies take too long and cost too much money. Multi-million-dollar studies over many years. It's not unusual. Historically, that has been probably the average. It frustrates me as an economist as much as you maybe. 3x3x3 rule is the idea that studies must take no more than 3 years to complete, cost no more than $3 million in total, and that they will have 3 levels of integrated vertical team review. That is the district level, the division level, and the headquarters. This is a big change for the way the Corps has done things. And so how we get that savings is the earlier application of risk-informed decision making. So what does that mean? I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but basically it is making important decisions earlier on in the process than we typically like to or have felt comfortable doing, resulting in some cost savings, some reduced study cost, reduced analytical costs, reduced modeling, that kind of thing. This is a depiction of the feasibility study process. Again, no more than 3 years. You'll see it point 3 there, the agency decision milestone, is where the difference really occurs under 3x3x3 and planning modernization as compared to the historical way of doing things. There, the agency, that is the Corps, endorses a recommended plan. That plan then gets analyzed at a feasibility level, which I know is a very big change for our resource agencies and our partners. Typically, there are an array of plans that are modeled in depth and analyzed in depth. And I do recognize, and the Corps recognizes that introducing just one alternative for a feasibility level analysis is a challenge and gives some of the research agencies heartburn, and I understand that. Once a recommended plan has been found to be in the federal interest, I'll talk more about that, what that means, it can then be signed and approved in the chief's report. So we're still in the feasibility phase. What does federal interest mean? This is a term that I often get asked about and I think causes a lot of confusion for our partners. A project is said to be in the, quote, federal interest if it meets the 5 criteria listed there on the screen. It must be a primary mission area, that is navigation, flood risk management, or ecosystem restoration. That includes coastal storm damage reduction. It must have a willing cost-sharing partner, you all, and the partners typically share between 25 and 35% of the total project costs. It must be fully policy compliant and environmentally acceptable, and the total benefits must outweigh the total costs. That's where the economists come in estimating the benefits. So what does it mean to have a project benefit for a core project? It's a little different than is typically analyzed. We don't use input-output models to necessarily evaluate employment impacts or GDP output or GRP. We think of benefits in the Corps as cost savings, making your lives more efficient, making your business more efficient. For navigation, that means reducing the transportation costs for ships coming into and out of the ports and waterways. And for flood risk management and coastal storm damage reduction, that means avoiding future costs for homeowners and businesses from future floods or storm events. So we're in the authorization phase now. Once you've got a chief's report that's signed, it goes, like I said, to the administration for clearance and then to Congress for authorization in a WRDA. As you all know, we haven't had a WRDA since '07. It's exciting to hear that there might be one this year. Once you have an authorization, you have to get back in line for appropriations, for the funding to actually implement. The president's budget has been performance-based for many years, since 1993 at least, which means that criteria and metrics are used to rank the investments. There are, as you know, a backlog of projects. I think WRDA 2007 authorized more than 700 projects and investigations, and I think only about half of them have seen any funding. So there's a backlog, a large queue of studies and projects that are waiting for funding, and so the president's budget uses various performance criteria to actually evaluate and rank the projects. Overall goal is to fund the highest priority work. I'll talk about what that means at an efficient rate. More and more there's an emphasis on providing enough funding in any given year to make meaningful work, to allow meaningful work to occur for that project. The idea being not to spread resources too thinly. So what are the performance criteria that the president's budget and OMB use? For navigation, it's the benefits to cost ratio, BCR, and the annual tonnage or containers. For flood risk management and coastal storm damage reduction, life safety is critical, obviously, and benefit to cost ratio is a very important metric. For ecosystem restoration, the presence of threatened or endangered species is critical. The regional or national significance of the project or the area is also important. Think Florida Everglades, for example. Now, for multi-purpose projects, those that involve, for example, flood risk management and ecosystem restoration, they are ranked according to their primary purpose, essentially. That's not to say that the other purpose doesn't count, it does, but they are first ranked by their primary purpose, and then any additional benefits that accrue to the other purpose help bolster the case for that in the final ranking. For example, you could have a flood risk management, we do have flood risk management and ecosystem restoration projects in the district, and those will be ranked by their flood risk management output if their primary purpose is that. But the habitat created, the threatened and endangered species protected or fostered will go into the ranking, will be considered by the administration when they do their performance-based budgeting. Another metric that's important is how close the project is to completion. Like I said, there's an emphasis to get projects done, to get them over the finish line, to not spread resources too thinly. So there is an increasing emphasis with the backlog of projects and studies to actually get them over the finish line and get them off the federal books. Now, a question that I'm sure you all have asked, and if you have, you probably got a very squishy answer from me or from others, is there a minimum BCR, minimum benefit to cost ratio for our projects to be eligible for funding? I'm going to try to give you a little bit less squishy answer than you've probably heard before. There is no hard and fast minimum. You've probably heard the number 2.5 thrown around. Before it was 2, maybe it was 3. 2.5 is considered, for flood risk management that is considered a high priority project. It has a benefit to cost ratio of 2.5, it's high priority. That is not to say that you need a 2.5 to be in the budget, and I'll show you examples of that actually from a budget. But all else equal, 2.5 is what the administration, what OMB, what the Corps will say is a high priority flood risk management project. For flood risk management, obviously life and safety are key factors why projects that have less than 2.5, 1.1, 1.0, 1.5 would get prioritized in the budget and actually get funding. For navigation, there is, besides being economically justified, that is 1-to-1, there is no other minimum benefit to cost ratio. What it does matter though is the annual tonnage, and there are various increments that are used to rank the projects and rank the waterways. 1 million tons is a bit of a magic number. Ports and waterways that have fewer than 1 million annual tons are not considered a high priority and will have a hard time competing for funding. So I wanted to show you an example of numbers from an actual president's budget. This was the FY13 budget request submitted the year before in February of 12. Very similar to what we just saw from Eric about the 14 budget. $4.7 billion total request. About half of that went towards operations and maintenance. That's very typical. About a third of it goes for construction projects, and about $100 million for investigations. And so I think the numbers are very similar, and we've seen that trend. This is sort of where it's falling out. Importantly, there were new starts in 13. People ask, can you get a new start funded? And the answer is yes. They're harder to come by, harder to justify, but they do happen. In 13, there were 3 construction new starts and 6 study new starts. So that is possible, and that's important. So what were the BCRs? I talked about how there was no hard and fast rule. The median, if you remember from your Staff 101 class, the median BCR is the value at which half are greater and half are lower. The median BCR for flood risk management was 2.65, but there were a third of them that were less than 2.5. So those that had less than 2.5 likely had a strong case to be made for life safety or other factors. For navigation, in the 13 budget, the median BCR was 3.6, but again, it ranged from 1.3 all the way to 18. I don't know who did that math, but 18. So it is possible, and I think those are important numbers. I want to circle back to the questions that I promised to answer. What are the major steps in the approval and funding of projects? Talked about study authorization and appropriation, the feasibility process, and getting to a chief's report. Authorization in a WRDA, and then appropriations in an Energy and Water Development Act. You all are probably very familiar with that process. How has the feasibility study process changed? Planning modernization is resulting in hopefully fewer costs, less time, better customer service, and a better use of the taxpayer dollar. What are the primary metrics and how are projects prioritized by the administration? Talked about there's no hard and fast minimum, but there are priorities, and in a world of constrained fiscal resources, there need to be priorities. So this is, we're living in slightly different times, but I think that there is hope that an improved feasibility process and better performance-based ranking and criteria are going to help us get more projects done more effectively. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, 2 questions. And then we have, I've listed on some of the websites that will be useful for you. Okay, so first question is the metrics for high priority ports. Why tons and not valuation of cargo? This is a good question. The way this goes back to how I said the way the Corps estimates benefits. The Corps estimates benefits as cost reductions, not GDP, not value added, not any of those things, but cost reductions. So our projects, deepening, for example, to the Port of Oakland to 50 feet results in the ability to load ships more fully, reducing the cost per ton to get cargo to and from China, Europe, wherever. So it's a policy decision. It's really a policy issue that the Corps has decided that benefits are cost savings. That is what it is. That's how we estimate them. That's what our models do. And I think that is at the heart of why it's tons and not value. Final question, 3x3x3. How does regulatory approval process fit into the process? Have they bought into it? This is, when I said that this is going to be a challenge working with our partners in regulatory agencies, it's true. To date, there have been no exceptions to this 3x3x3 rule. We're in the middle of converting to it, and it's supposed to be fully implemented by FY14. There are exceptions to that process. Haven't seen any granted yet. And I think this is it's going to take a lot of work by the Corps to convince our partners and the regulatory agencies that we can do this and that we need to do this. So I'm not giving you a kind of another squishy answer, but I'd be happy to talk with you about it afterwards. We have some important folks here. We've got Colonel John Baker here, Jesse Burton Evans from our navigation program to hopefully help answer some of those questions. Thank you. Thank you.